and close that window out because they show up as little funky gray boxes. And what we're going to use is just a very, very simple image, and we're just going to insert it. Nice to find it. There we go. And these are kind of like basic but interesting images, right? We'll start with this one first because it's very simple. It says scanned because it's a JPEG image. It's really very simple. We could say simple artwork and, you know, begin to lie to this and say, okay, we want that color, that one, and this black outline and the white, right? And we could go like this and say, okay, let's make this a lot bigger. You know, there's our big automatically generated pair, right? And this is what it looks like. It did a pretty good job. You can see all the different sections. That's just a little, kind of little piece of junky stuff we can get rid of. But you can see it did a pretty good job, but it's really kind of boring, right? That is a very boring pair, right? And it's, you know, always going to be flat like this. Sure, I can change some of the fills. I can fill in holes. I could do a whole lot more of work with this. But if I'm going to do that much work, I might as well do that much work with my manual punching tools. So, you know, you can still use some of your select tools. So I'm going to go ahead and say, you know, new one, new file. Let's go ahead and insert the same image. And this time we're just going to say, you know what, just put it as a template. And I'm going to make it a big pair again because you can always scale it down. So, and this is what the template looks like. If you want it to be a little bit darker, you hit the plus symbol. And here's our template. Nothing's going to be automatically generated in this. You know, we're going to look at using some of the tools. Now, I'm going to concentrate right now on this section. And, you know, then we'll worry about the highlights. So, you know, I'm going to go ahead and say create a freehand area. And, you know, here's the color tool. I can pick this if I want, just click on it and say, you know, really, you know, I want it to be kind of close to that green and, you know, come over here and, you know, add that to the custom colors and select it and say, okay. So now that's what color that's going to be created as, right? That's the color I've selected for the area. It's going to match it to my thread chart below, but, you know, it's a pretty close color match to, I'm sure, one of the threads. Okay, it's saying what type do you want to make over here? And we're saying it's an area. Stitch type, auto judge. You can change that here, you can change that later. Since we changed the color, I'm just going to say I want it to be a complex fill. Pre-close has to do with when you're punching. If this is on, instead of seeing like an open line as you come around here, it'll be a closed kind of rubber band look, and we'll look at that later. Some people like it. Some people don't like it. I'm not overly fond of it. But now we're ready to punch. And, you know, try not to start someplace it's going to be difficult to connect to. Like starting here would be relatively easy to connect to. So just place your first click. And let me escape out of that. I'm going to mute there you go. Shirley, I have you on mute just because I couldn't talk over top of that. And I'll unmute you in a second. Okay, so, you know, we're going to go ahead and pick that tool again. And let me do this real quick. Okay, so we're going to leave that off. It's an area, so, you know, try not to start like right in here. That would be a little more difficult to connect to. But if you start up here, you know, that's easy for, you know, it's an easy place for the program to close, and you can control that. And we're just going to right-click to go around the curve. And I do a lot more right-clicking than left-clicking, even if it's a straight area sometimes, unless it's, you know, just deadly straight. You know, you can control the amount of this curve based on where you know, place your points or how you, you know, bend the line, right? All right, so we come up here. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and just place a right click here. See, I'm bending. And then hit Enter. And see what happens is I get that little warp there if I do a right click when I want to close in a straight area. So that's something to keep in mind, right? So when you're doing this, and you're creating this, if you start up here with a left click, That's a straight point. You really should close with a straight or left click as well. Let me go ahead and go around this real quick again. And you know what, I'm not worried about those sections in the middle. You know, I'm not real worried about that shading because I certainly am not going to shade this pair, you know, with those shapes as they are and dig holes in this. I'm just not going to do that. That's not going to give me the best quality for an embroidery design. Okay, now when I come up here, if I see how I'm bending, I'm still in a right click. If I left click, it stops that bending that's going on. And when I hit enter, I get a smooth line there this time. Okay, so I'm going to hit escape, get out of my digitizing tools, go up to 3D, and this is what I have. It's just a very complex fill. There's really not a lot of, you know, interesting things to this complex fill. You know, it's just a big filled pair. But if I start looking at some of the other tools that I have, then I can get some very interesting things going on. Radial, we'll work with Radial, and I'll show you what happens. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Radial gives me that little center point. That center point doesn't have to stay there. I could move my center point up here and generate that out. Or I could move it off to the side. It depends on the shape and how it's going to handle it. If I put a fill in this, that might be, you know, indeed very interesting, right? Or I could put it up here. And let me go ahead and just put a quick fill in that. And, you know, there's the effect. Let me get a little more staggered pattern so you can kind of see that a little bit better. You know, I've got, you know, this little kind of texture to it and this little flow to it, right? Now, for some shapes that might not work well. The closer I get, obviously, you know, the more severe that is going to be into here. But, you know, and if I put it up here, I'm going to have some issues with how it flows down here, right? But that's an option for some things. You could even try putting this down here. Okay, see how the light plays off of that? Even on the screen, you can see there's going to be some variation, right? So that's something to try, but your best bet is probably going to be the arc fill. The arc fill has some little things you should use. Think about using smooth edge for one. The maximum step here is 6. You will probably want to take that down a little bit, just, you know, to control that a little bit better. Random stitch length, you know, you can try that, but you're generally better off controlling this pattern for something that, you know, you really want to, you know, control the flow of. And let me see, I'm going to turn that blue and see if that's easier to see. Not really, huh? Okay. We'll move our arc center. Let's try our arc center up here. Okay. See just the placement of moving that center point around, how you get some flow to this, right? You don't want to put this on the inside, though. That arc fill's not going to work. See, nothing happens when you put it on the inside. But as you move this around, you're going to get a different effect for this pair. You know, moving it off to the side is going to give you a different look. And you can control, you know, how that kind of flows. Although that's difficult to see, but I think it probably is fairly decent. I'm going to move it right there. The closer that is, the more severe the arcing is. But it does allow you to kind of play with the light a little bit. See how you're getting that instant, you know it's kind of rounded and it's got some shape to it, right? You guys have any questions on the arc fill or anything?
My screen is way behind what you're talking about.
Okay, are you on DSL or are you on satellite?
I'm on Time Warner Cable.
Yeah, so you should be you should be okay then. Like, I mean, Fran and Shirley, are you guys seeing what is on the screen?
I am, and I'm on this.
Okay, Shirley, you okay? Oh, you know what? I muted you. Sorry, Shirley. I'm going to unmute you. Sorry. Can you see what's okay, you can see what's going on the screen as you go?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay. Jan, it's got to be the internet connection, but I mean, I'm on Time Warner Cable, and I had to have them come and run all the lines to us because we were just having some serious issues, but that had to do with damaged lines. But
well,
you might want to.
A lot of this stuff I have done, and I know what you're talking about, but it would be nice to see it happening as you're talking.
Right,
so
right.
I'll contact my cable company.
Yeah, I had some seriously like slow moving issues, and complained, and they finally sent us a new modem, and then they finally came and checked our lines. And one of my friends said, you know, you can complain to them about the high-speed lines because sometimes they don't actually run the high-speed lines, the high-speed cables to your house. And we've had, yeah, it's like the digital TV thing. You know, like every once in a while we were having digital TV issues as well, and they had to do with the speed of the line that they actually had run to our house. And so I would call them and kind of grumble because that's got to be an internet issue. But where are you located near Toledo?
No, I'm located close to Kansas City in Missouri.
I would definitely complain to them and see if they'll, you know, because, I mean, it took 2 or 3 times of me just really being obnoxious, truly, to get them to come and look at ours here. And then the guy said, oh, well, you've got old cables here. That's why. And what they had done was literally just use the old cables that we had here from 15, 20 years ago. And those cables, the new cables, are faster. They're, I think, a little bit wider or something, and but they're a faster speed inside. And at least that's what the guy told us, so we've had no problems. But so we've got this arc going on, right? And you know, you can move this and play with this. It's going to depend on what you're using this on as to how it behaves. Okay, see how you get something like this? You know, that happens with this fill because it's trying to navigate this shape and do this contour, so you just have to move it. But sometimes you just have to move this around until you find something that you're happy with, and, you know, or go in here and say, you know what, really, I think I need a different pattern because you can't, like smooth edges I use because it controls some of the jaggedness here, right? And I changed my step because if I left it at 6, I tend to get more stringy stuff. But you might want to try some of these different patterns and see what happens. That gives you at least an idea of what's going on with the fill. But using the different patterns, you get a completely different effect. And, you know, I mean, it's funny how something that you may not like at all turns out to be a really nice pattern when it comes to, you know, this type of fill. You can see, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, or you can see, you know, how the fills behave. It doesn't quite look like it's curving anywhere unless you look right here, right? So, you know, this would not necessarily be a fill that you wanted to use, at least for something going in that direction, but it might be perfect if you move it over here. See the difference? And you can definitely see, you know, the curve going on here. Or if you move it down here. And it has to do with, you know, how the patterns are actually designed. You know, what they all have a pretty specific stitch direction where they look the best in, even though they are, you know, just basic patterns, not stamped patterns, right? So play with this to get, you know, what you want. And, you know, once you have what you want, ignore this. Generally, it doesn't show up unless your stabilizing's bad. But, you know, do a test stitch, and if it shows up, then, you know, you don't necessarily have to move this point, but you can move these points. And sometimes you'll get a whole different effect. See? But that one line that we have before I move the in and out points is an overlap line. And most of the time it does not show up in the actual finished stitching, but every once in a while it does. And if you get nervous enough about it, simply moving the in and out points will take care of it. So, okay, so now we've got this basic shape going on. And let me close down my participant window. We've got this basic shape going on. And if we wanted to add some highlights to it, it's, kind of hard to see behind that. So I'm just going to click over here on my stitch sequence bar. And I'm just going to, hide that and go out of 3D view. And then I get to everything behind this. Now, I'm not going to use these shapes to highlight something if I'm manually punching. I'm going to use, the other tools that I have. And I want to kind of control this. And the best tool to use to control, where things are with your in and out points and traveling stitches and everything else, it's going to be, your satin tool. And I'll just leave it at the default for right now. But, this one, I'm just going to start close together, 2 little left clicks. And I'll right click because, I do want to have some curving going on in this. And, I'm probably going to extend this just a little bit and narrow it down. And then start to, widen this up. And let me go back for a second. And kind of try to, follow the flow of this and start to widen this up a little. And you can see I'm kind of controlling the flow of the stitches with, how I place these lines, right? Okay, so there's my satin area, and it doesn't look like much. It really just looks like a big satin blob, right? But, and you can reshape this, and I would probably extend it a little more down in here to get some of the shape, in that. But, what you've got is, your satin stitching. We're going to use compensation. We're going to take out the underlay, and we're going to use a fill. And you can try to match that fill, but remember you're curving. So, I would maybe select the pattern, the same pattern, maybe. Because you're curving, it's going to appear a little bit different anyway, and I think we will on this one. And then I'm going to change my density. And what I'm going to do, I might just use a random stitch length since it's, but my density is at 0.4, which is, matches up pretty much with the thread density. And, try maybe 1, see if you like that. And hold on, my program's thinking about this. And hold on, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recorder because we might have to start and pause. Okay, so, we're in satin. I'm going to take out the underlay. I'm still going to use the compensation. And we'll enable the fill, and I'll just use a random pattern right now and apply it. Okay, now I'm going to change my density, and I would start with 1. You can see what 1 looks like. There's how dense 1 is, right? If you don't like that, then, come back in here and, try 1.5. And if you still think that's too thick, just keep going. You can go, really quite wide, but I'm going to stop at 2. Okay, so I've got this. Here's my in and out points. I'm controlling anything that would run underneath it. And I should have a pattern in this now. See? And the problem with shading like this on this arced fill, right, this green arced fill, is it's not going to fall completely into, the stitching here. I think we ended up putting that over here, didn't we? But it's not going to fall completely into that stitching. There we go. But it's going to fall into some of the stitching, so it's going to highlight. Now, if you want to, you could come in and you could say, okay, you know, really, maybe I want to take that higher. But I would do a little test before you commit to opening up quite that wide because, you know, what's on the screen doesn't always show up, right? Now, we've got this pair green, and this needs to be, you know, not white. I mean, if you make this white, it's going to be just too stark against that, see? But if you make this maybe like a limey yellow, just a little bit lighter than that, it's going to blend in quite nicely. So that's kind of one quick way to do it. You could do this in sections. You could, you know, do the little bit of highlighting up here and then maybe highlight across to make more of an arc look here as well. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? So, but that's one way to handle highlighting.
Change the color.
I'm sorry? Looks good. Yeah, once you change, you know, once you match those colors up, it shows up really good. Now, the other thing that you could do, if you really want to blend these in, is select that, and you could go into your arc fill and use the same settings. You wouldn't necessarily want to use smooth edge on this one, but, you know, take that setting to 4, you know, select your pattern and match it to, you know, the pattern 9 that we selected, right? And apply it. We want to change our density because we were up to like 2.5, I think. Okay, so 2.5, right? There's our density. And if you want to match up where these points are, if you select these, you can take both of these points to here. So here's the point to here. Here's the point to here. See what happened when I selected both of these and just dragged one point? It puts them in the exact same position. Now, the problem you have to look at here on this yellow is your in and out points. And, you know, here's where that in point came in. You know, you might try moving these around a little bit, but you're probably, with this, you're kind of stuck with what the program gives you on those in and out points. And I might not have turned off the underlay. Let me go check that real quick. I'll bet I didn't. Nope. Okay, see how that just kind of blends in, but I still have to watch. I have to play with these lines a little bit and see, you know, where it really starts and where it really ends to get rid of some of that outlining that goes on. Okay? But that would just blend it using the same pattern right into the current stitches. It doesn't look like it on your screen, but if we're using the same pattern going the same direction, then that's going to just kind of start fitting into, these will sit a little bit above, but it'll start just fitting into with these stitch points. See where the stitch points are? Into that green layer, and it'll really blend in and look pretty natural. But you do have to watch where your in and out points are on this.
Bernie?
You guys have a,
Are you waiting for me?
Janet?
Okay. A lot of times what I do is simply copy and paste, like the green pear, the fill that you use. I just copy and paste it right on top of that, then select it, remove the underlay, lower the density, and then reshape it to what my highlight should look like.
You can do it that way, but if you're going to use, you know, manual punching tools, and, I mean, you'd have a lot of reshaping to do with this, whereas this I just punched it real quick.
It goes pretty fast when you use your edit points.
True, you can reshape, you know, with your edit points, but, you know, if you know, either way, you could do it either way. and stuff, but I usually just do the manual punch option because I'm pretty comfortable with the manual punching.
Right.
In that. So, but you could do it either way. You know, to me, it would take a little bit more work to, I think, reshape it than just punch it, but it depends on what you're familiar with.
Yeah.
And, but even, you know, once I change the density, I'd still get a different effect. Like this density is 4.0, right?
Right.
This density is 2.5. So if I go 0.4, you know, that's going to blend. See how it's blending right in?
Uh-huh.
You know, so it does blend right in. It just doesn't look like it's blending quite because we've opened it up. But these needle penetrations are dropping right into that fill.
Right.
So, but you could do it either way. To me, it's easier to just punch it. And to me, I think it's a good practice to get into of using that column tool and manually punching. You know, you get to control things a little bit better. Like I'm controlling the stitch direction on this when I use the satin stitch tool. This is a complex fill. This is a satin fill. So, you know, the difference is I actually can control where, oh no, this is an arc fill. We changed it to arc, never mind. But when I punched it, you know, I could control the shape real quick. But when I changed it to arc, I lost the editing ability for the direction. Anyway, so you can do it either way. And, you know, it's whatever you're comfortable with, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and open up another file. This one's, you know, they're still very basic images, but they're, you know, this one's a little more complicated just for the simple fact that, you know, you've got all of these pieces to work with, right? And, you know, I would just insert this as a template, and we'll make this big too. And, you know, you've got these pieces to work with. Well, you know, if I really digitize this based on these colors, I'd have these chunky things in here, right? And, you know, I wouldn't want to do that, but I do want to control how this flows. And I can't necessarily, you know, I could do that with the arc fill. I couldn't do it with the contour fill, or I could do it with the satin fill. And, you know, with this, trying to arc all of those, you pull your hair out a little bit. So the satin tool is probably your best bet because I can control exactly how these flow. Because every time I place a point, it's going to be a direction, right? So this I would not use the arc tool on, just for the simple fact I'd have a lot of bits and pieces to worry about. But let me escape this tool. You know, you can change it. I'm just going to pick, you know, we'll pick like the deep red over here. And, you know, I'm going to have to put a fill in it because obviously that's just not going to work, right? So I can put a fill in. And I'm just going to use the default pattern for right now. So I've got this, and one thing you have to think about on satin, even the program has stitch shortening, which if you don't know what stitch shortening is, when you come into an arc area like this, let's see if it'll show it. See how those stitches pull back a little as you fill in this curve? These are stitch points, but you can see some of the stitches up in here. The tighter the curve, the more that happens, like in the letter O. And the reason stitch shortening is built into the program is, you know, like if you create the perfect example, a letter O, you have more stitches towards the center of that opening than on the outside of that opening. So stitch shortening keeps the stitches on top in place, but pulls the stitches underneath away. And it does it for every curve in the program. This is not so severe, but it would still be doing the stitch shortening. Letter O is very severe on the inside. Let me show you real quick. Okay, see how this would have more stitches in it automatically because, you know, it's fanning out, right? And I don't know if it'll show the stitch shortening, if we can see it or not. All right, let me do it this way. I want to show you that because it does it automatically, and it really is, you know, a neat little feature in the program. Okay, see, that's your underlay, but in here, see where these stitches are, and they fan out to this. It's not really showing it very well here, but it automatically does it. I don't know if that makes sense, right? Because I know I didn't change that setting in my program. Hold on. Okay, see these stitches pulling back here? Right here? You would not notice those when you go to stitch it. Okay, see how small that is? I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see it, but see how tight that is in there? The stitches pull back out of here, and it looks uneven when you zoom in, but it really isn't. See these stitches here? Here's where the outline is, and these are the stitches that have pulled back so that you don't have something quite as full in the center, but still have an even look on the outside. That is called stitch shortening. It's actually a setting in the program. Some people will play with it. It's a little bit, you have to really play with it to get comfortable with it, but stitch shortening is right here. And, you know, it's showing you what it does. And you can change these percentages, but you have to be careful with what you're doing on this, because if you change them too severely, you're going to end up with gaps, or you'll end up with something too heavy. But I wanted you to know where those are, because we'll look at those, you know, as we kind of get into the settings a little bit more down the road. But these help you control, you know, how dense something is on a tight curve, how dense your radial is, you know, on that, you know, the radial stitch. When you have something really close to the edge of something, this will help take some of that thickness out. So I probably have lost you in all of that, huh? Do you guys understand what I'm talking about on the stitch shortening?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now on this would be, you know, I wouldn't punch this one again. This would be something I would use, you know, kind of the system that you were talking about where you know, copy and paste it, right? You know, Control-C, Control-V, here's the pasted top copy, change the color. And, you know, I'm going to hide this one and go out of 3D and zoom in. And, you know, from here, you know, you can kind of just left click on this and shrink it down, or you can just punch this over again. I don't know that reshaping would be something I necessarily did, but let me zoom out so I can get to those. But, you know, you could definitely shrink this down and pretty much keep the shape. And use the skew arrows, you know, to control that a little bit better. You know, and if you needed to, you could come in here and, you know, delete some of these or reshape real quick. In this case, I would probably just delete a few and then begin pulling this up. And I wouldn't necessarily worry about a perfect reshape in here. You might even do some of these things. You just have to watch on a satin stitch, you know, that you don't cause someplace that would, you know, not be able to be formed, right? And then, of course, you would want to change the density. So, I'll make this, 1.75. And, what you end up with is, make this a little bit lighter so you can see it a little bit better. Make it pink. What you end up with is, something that matches perfectly. You still have to worry about the points. You've got, once you edit, you've got a different stitch direction in some ways, but it should match up pretty well. And, if you're just going to blend it with a slightly different color, that's going to blend in pretty good. And that's so, but that's, you could do it either or. To me, that didn't take too awful long, but honestly, to me, it's just as fast to punch this. But it depends on what your preferences are. And, the same thing here, if you look at this image, because I'm going to send this to you guys for you guys to play with shaping these things and, shading and playing with the shading. But you can even do the same thing on this pumpkin stem. I started here, but, logically you would start with the stem, where you're creating either the base is going to be green or, and this is a highlight, or this is the base and this is the highlight. Either or, this one's a little bit more complicated. And honestly, for embroidery, I would take some of the complication out of this, right? The same thing with this. Does this little dip make much difference? Does that little curve make much difference in embroidery? Those are all things you have to decide. If it affects your satin stitching and you want to blend it in, it might not be really worth it in the scope of things. Nobody's going to really notice it, for all the work you've put into it. So make some decisions about, what works, and what doesn't work. Or, if you want to use, the satin fill or not. On this, to me, I would just use the satin fill on everything because these are just automatically going to curve. Even this has a little curve to it. You want that curve to make it look like, the pumpkin, right? So, do you guys have any questions?